Nice ink, sweetheart. Did you get that done in a strip mall basement, or was it a dare from your sorority sisters? The voice cut through the heavy, humid air of the motor pool, thick with the scent of diesel fumes, hydraulic fluid, and baking asphalt. Chloe Barker did not flinch. She didn't turn around. She kept her eyes fixed on the undercarriage of the up-armored MRAP, her clipboard steady in her hand. A bead of sweat traced a line down her neck, vanishing into the collar of her royal blue short-sleeved top, but her posture remained relaxed, almost statuesque. She was used to the noise, not just the grinding of impact wrenches and the roar of engines testing their limits, but the other noise. The skepticism, the side-eye glances, the assumptions that a woman standing in a motor pool with long blonde hair tied back in a ponytail must be lost, a spouse, or a distraction. "Hey, I'm talking to you." The voice was closer now, dropping an octave into a range that demanded attention. Chloe finally turned, her movement slow and deliberate. She capped her pen with a soft click. Standing just 3 feet away was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and bad attitude. He was tall, wearing the distinct operational camouflage of the higher-tier units. His sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that looked like braided steel cable. He had the requisite operator beard, groomed but full, and a pair of ballistic sunglasses resting on top of his head. He was flanked by 2 others, younger, leaner, both wearing the smug expressions of men who had just passed selection and thought they owned the ground they walked on. "I heard you the first time," Chloe said. Her voice was level, lacking any tremor of intimidation. It was a voice that had given coordinates over the roar of a firefight, though these men didn't know that. "I'm busy. If you need a vehicle dispatch, the office is inside the hangar." The lead operator, whose name tape read Miller, stepped into her personal space. He didn't look at the clipboard. He didn't look at the contractor badge clipped to her belt. His eyes were fixed on her right arm, exposed by the short sleeves of her blue shirt. There, on the bicep, was a tattoo. It was faded, the black ink turning a dusty gray-green with age and sun exposure. The lines were slightly blown out, the details obscured by time and perhaps the rough conditions under which it had been applied. It looked like a winged dagger wrapped in thorny vines, but to the untrained eye it was a smudge, a mess. "I don't need a dispatch," Miller said, crossing his arms. "I need to know why a civilian is wandering around a restricted Tier 1 motor pool, and I'm curious about the ink. It's personal," Chloe said, turning back to the MRAP. Miller laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Personal. It looks like prison scratch. Or maybe something you got on spring break in Cancun." He looked at his buddies. "Look at this. We got civilians walking around with trashy ink thinking they look tough. It's disrespectful to the uniform." Chloe took a breath. She counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. She turned back. "Sergeant," she said, reading his rank, though his attitude screamed entitlement rather than leadership. "I am here to inspect the retrofitting on the suspension of these vehicles before the deployment cycle. I'm the lead logistics consultant for the manufacturer. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a job to do." Miller didn't move. He leaned against the fender of the vehicle she was inspecting, effectively blocking her access. "Manufacturer consultant, huh? So you're a sales rep. Great. That doesn't explain why you're sporting a jagged-looking piece of ink that looks like you did it yourself with a rusty needle. You know, in this unit, tattoos mean something. We earn our ink." One of the younger soldiers, a corporal with a high and tight haircut, chimed in. "Yeah, looks like she tried to copy the unit crest but gave up halfway through. Stolen valor is a thing, ma'am, even if it's just a bad drawing." Chloe felt a heat rise in her chest that had nothing to do with the midday sun. It was a familiar burn, an old anger she usually kept locked away in a box deep in her mind. Her hand involuntarily twitched toward her right arm, her fingers grazing the faded skin of the tattoo. The texture of the skin there was slightly raised, scar tissue mixed with ink. Suddenly, the motor pool dissolved. The smell of diesel was replaced by the acrid stench of burning rubber and cordite. The bright sun was replaced by the green-tinted gloom of a blackout tent in the Korangal Valley. The air was freezing, not hot. She wasn't wearing a royal blue blouse. She was wearing a torn combat shirt stained with mud and dried blood. "Hold still, Barker," a voice rasped. It was shaky. "I'm holding," she whispered back, gritting her teeth against the pain. The needle wasn't a tattoo gun. It was a sterilized sewing needle dipped in a mixture of soot and ink from a broken pen. "You have to finish it," she said. "If we don't make it out tomorrow, we take this with us." "I'll finish it," the voice promised. "Just don't pass out on me." The memory snapped shut like a steel trap. Chloe blinked, the bright sunlight of the motor pool flooding back into her vision. Miller was still there, smirking, waiting for a reaction. He thought he was teasing a corporate stooge. He had no idea he was poking a sleeping tiger. "If you're done critiquing my appearance," Chloe said, her voice dropping a few degrees colder, "move." Miller's smile vanished. He straightened up, looming over her. "You don't give orders here, sweetheart. You're a guest. And frankly, looking at that mess on your arm, I'm not sure you belong anywhere near this hardware. It's offensive. Why don't you go cover that up? Or better yet, go back to the mall and buy a long-sleeved shirt." He reached out, his finger pointing accusingly at the faded image. "That's supposed to be a dagger, right? It looks like a spoon. A broken spoon." "What, were you a cook?" The disrespect was palpable. It wasn't just about the tattoo anymore. It was about the power dynamic. He needed to feel superior to the civilian woman in the blue shirt. He needed to assert his dominance over his territory. From across the motor pool near the open bay doors of the maintenance hangar, a figure watched the interaction. Chief Warrant Officer 4 Elias Thorne was an old man by special operations standards. He was gray-haired, leathery, and moved with the silent grace of a predator. He was wiping grease from his hands with a red rag when he heard the raised voices. He squinted against the glare. He saw Miller, loud, brash, talented but arrogant Miller, harassing a woman in a blue top. Thorne didn't recognize her immediately. He saw the blonde hair, the civilian clothes. He sighed, preparing to walk over and tell Miller to stow the ego. Then the woman turned slightly to shield her eyes from the sun, and Thorne saw her profile. He froze. The rag dropped from his hand. He didn't step forward. He didn't yell at Miller. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His fingers, usually steady enough to defuse an IED with seconds on the clock, trembled slightly as he dialed a number that very few people possessed. It rang twice. "This is Ironside," a gruff voice answered. "Sir, it's Thorne. I'm at the Bravo motor pool. Make it quick, Chief. I'm in a briefing with the Joint Chiefs." "Sir, she's here." "Who?" "Barker. Chloe Barker." There was a silence on the line so profound it felt like the signal had dropped. Then the general's voice came back, tight and urgent. "You're sure? She's wearing a blue shirt. Standing by the MRAPs. Miller and his boys are giving her a hard time. They're mocking the ink, sir." The line went dead. Thorne put the phone back in his pocket. He picked up his rag, wiped his hands again, and leaned back against the hangar door. He wasn't going to intervene. Not yet. Justice was coming, and it was going to be biblical. Back at the MRAP, the situation was deteriorating. Miller had moved from mockery to active obstruction. "I'm going to need to see your ID again," Miller said, holding out his hand. "The visitor pass. I already showed it to the gate guard in the hangar NCO," Chloe said, her patience fraying. "Well, I'm the NCO IC of this detail, and I say I need to verify it. And frankly, I think it might be fake. Just like that tattoo." He snatched the clipboard from her hand. Chloe didn't flinch, but her hands balled into fists at her sides. "Give it back," she said quietly. "Or what?" Miller sneered. "You gonna call corporate? You gonna file a complaint? Go ahead. I'm Delta. Complaints slide off me like rain. You're in the presence of the elite, sweetheart. You should be showing a little respect instead of flaunting your bad life choices." He tossed the clipboard onto the hood of the MRAP with a loud clatter. Papers fluttered. "You're right," Chloe said. Her voice changed. It wasn't the voice of a consultant anymore. It was the voice of someone who had commanded respect in places where respect was bought with blood. "I am in the presence of the elite, but I'm having a hard time finding them right now. All I see is a boy with a beard who thinks kindness is weakness." Miller's face reddened. "What did you say to me?" "I said you're undisciplined," Chloe said, stepping forward, invading his space this time. "You're focusing on a civilian's appearance instead of the suspension torque specs on a vehicle that is supposed to carry your team through an ambush. You're arrogant, and you have no idea what you're looking at." Miller looked like he was about to explode. He took a step back, hand twitching near his belt, not for a weapon but in a gesture of aggression. "Get off my flight line," he spat. "Now, before I have MPs drag you out, and cover that garbage on your arm. It's a disgrace to everyone who actually served." The air in the motor pool seemed to vibrate. The other mechanics had stopped working. The silence was heavy, suffocating. Then a sound broke the tension. It was the low, rhythmic thrum of engines, not the tactical hum of a Humvee, but the purr of high-end government SUVs. 3 black Suburbans tore around the corner of the hangar, tires kicking up gravel. They moved with a speed and precision that signaled a high-value target or a high-ranking officer. They didn't slow down until they were practically on top of the group. The lead vehicle screeched to a halt 10 feet from where Miller stood. The doors flew open before the wheels had fully stopped turning. Miller spun around, confusion replacing his anger. This wasn't standard procedure. 2 MPs in full tactical gear stepped out of the first vehicle, scanning the perimeter. From the second vehicle, a captain jumped out, holding a door open, but it was the man who emerged from the back seat that sucked the oxygen out of the motor pool. He was a mountain of a man, wearing the operational camouflage pattern uniform of a general officer. 3 stars gleamed on his chest. His beret was maroon, perfectly formed. His face was scarred, weathered, and currently set in a mask of absolute fury. It was Lieutenant General Marcus Ironside, the commander of Joint Special Operations, a living legend in the community. Miller's jaw dropped. He snapped to attention so fast his heels cracked. The 2 younger operators beside him followed suit, their faces draining of color. "Room attention," Miller barked, though it was unnecessary. Everyone within 100 yards was already freezing in place. General Ironside ignored Miller. He ignored the salute. He ignored the terrified expressions of the young soldiers. His eyes were locked on one person. Chloe Barker stood still, her arms at her sides. She didn't salute. She wasn't in uniform. She just watched the general approach. The general stopped 2 feet in front of her. The silence stretched, agonizingly long. Miller was trembling slightly, his eyes darting back and forth. He had just threatened to throw out a woman who had drawn the attention of a 3-star general. He was doing the mental math of his career, and the numbers were coming up 0. "Chloe," the general said. His voice was rough, like gravel tumbling in a dryer. "Marcus," she replied softly. The general let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a decade. He stepped forward and, to the absolute shock of everyone present, pulled the woman in the blue shirt into a crushing bear hug. It wasn't a polite diplomatic embrace. It was the desperate clinging hug of 2 people who had survived the end of the world together. Chloe buried her face in the general's shoulder, her hands gripping the fabric of his uniform. "I thought you were gone," the general whispered loud enough for Miller to hear. "When the birds went down in the valley, the report said no survivors. I walked out," Chloe whispered back, pulling away. "Took me 3 weeks, but I walked out." The general held her at arm's length, scanning her face, looking for the scars of that journey. Then his eyes drifted down to her right arm, to the royal blue sleeve, to the faded gray-green tattoo that Miller had mocked. He reached out and touched it gently with his thumb. "The Valkyrie," he said softly. "The broken Valkyrie," she corrected. The general nodded. He turned slowly, his demeanor shifting from emotional reunion to cold, hard command. He faced Miller. The sergeant was sweating profusely now. "Sir, I didn't know." "Didn't know what, Sergeant?" The general's voice was deadly quiet. "I didn't know she was a friend of yours, sir." "A friend?" The general laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was a terrifying sound. "You think this is about nepotism? You think because she knows a general, she gets a pass?" "No, sir. You mocked her." The general interrupted. "My chief warrant officer tells me you mocked her ink. You called it prison scratch. You called it a disgrace." Miller swallowed hard. "It looks unrefined, sir." "I was just enforcing standards." "Standards," the general repeated. He began to unbutton the cuff of his right sleeve. He rolled the fabric up past his wrist, past his forearm, up to his bicep. "Look, Sergeant." Miller looked. There, on the general's massive arm, was a tattoo. It was identical to Chloe's. The same winged dagger, the same thorny vines, the same faded, blown-out gray-green ink. It looked like it had been done with a sewing needle and soot in a cave, because it had. Miller's eyes widened. He looked from the general's arm to Chloe's arm, and the realization hit him like a sledgehammer. "This isn't prison scratch, son," the general said, his voice booming across the motor pool so every mechanic, every driver, every soldier could hear. "This is the mark of Task Force Valkyrie." Miller whispered. "Task Force Valkyrie. That's a myth." "It was a suicide mission," the general corrected. 12 years ago. The Pech Valley. We were cut off, surrounded by 300 insurgents. No air support, no extraction. We were out of ammo, out of water, and out of time." The general gestured to Chloe. "This woman, this civilian you just tried to kick off your flight line, she wasn't a logistics consultant then. She was the cultural support team specialist attached to my unit. When our comms officer took a round to the throat, she took the radio. When our medic went down, she packed wounds. And when we ran out of bullets, she picked up a rifle." The general stepped closer to Miller until he was nose to nose with the sergeant. "We were trapped in a cave for 6 days. We thought we were dead men walking. So we made a pact. We used a sewing needle from a survival kit and ink made from burning plastic and MRE wrappers. We marked ourselves, the Broken Valkyrie, because we were the ones who carried the fallen." Chloe stepped forward then. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of history. "There were 12 of us in that cave," she said. Only 4 of us walked out. The general, me, and 2 others who have since passed from their wounds. She looked at her tattoo. It's faded because we didn't have professional equipment. It's jagged because the cave floor was shaking from mortar impacts while we did it. It looks like trash to you because you're used to air-conditioned tattoo parlors and artists who take credit cards. This tattoo cost more than your entire career. Miller looked like he wanted to vomit. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound, sickening shame. He had just insulted a woman who had fought in one of the most legendary classified survival stands in the history of the regiment. General Ironside rolled his sleeve back down, buttoning it slowly. You talk about standards, Sergeant. You talk about the elite. The elite don't judge a warrior by their gender. They don't judge a veteran by the quality of their ink. They judge them by their deeds, and by that standard you are not fit to stand in her shadow. The general turned to his aide. Captain, get the sergeant major of the army on the line, and get this man's commanding officer. I want a review of his fitness for leadership initiated immediately. Sir, Miller croaked. Quiet, the general snapped. You had your chance to speak. You used it to belittle a hero. Now you listen. He turned back to Chloe. The hardness melted from his face again. Come on, Chloe. We have a lot to catch up on. And I think you're done inspecting this vehicle. Actually, Chloe said, a small sad smile touching her lips. The suspension on this MRAP is out of spec. The rear strut mount is cracked. If they take it out, it'll fail within 50 miles. She looked at Miller one last time. I was trying to tell you that before you started talking about my shirt. Miller stared at the ground. The general chuckled, shaking his head. Still saving lives, even when they don't deserve it. Let's go. The general guided Chloe toward the waiting SUV. The door closed with a solid thud. The convoy peeled away, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. Miller stood alone in the center of the motor pool. The silence was absolute. The younger soldiers stepped away from him, distancing themselves from the blast radius of his career. Across the tarmac, Chief Warrant Officer Thorne watched the SUVs disappear. He put his phone away, picked up a wrench, and went back to work. The lesson had been delivered. The fallout was swift but quiet. That is the way of the special operations community. There were no public court-martials, no press releases, but the roster changed. Sergeant Miller was reassigned to a training battalion, far away from the tip of the spear, where he would spend the next 3 years teaching basic land navigation to privates. He was stripped of his team leader status. But the real change happened in the culture of the motor pool. 3 weeks later, Chloe returned. She was wearing the same royal blue shirt. She walked into the hangar, her clipboard in hand. The atmosphere was different. As she walked past the bays, heads turned, but not with disdain. Tools were set down. Men and women in uniform stood a little straighter. A young corporal, one of the ones who had been with Miller that day, stepped into her path. Chloe paused, bracing herself for another confrontation. Ma'am, the corporal said. He looked nervous. Yes, Corporal. He hesitated, then snapped to attention and rendered a sharp, crisp salute. The suspension on the MRAP, the one you flagged, we pulled it apart. The strut was sheared halfway through. We wouldn't have seen it until it snapped on the road. Chloe softened. She returned the salute, though she wasn't required to. Good catch, Corporal. Thank you, ma'am. And, sorry about before. Chloe nodded. Just do the work, Corporal. The standard is the standard. She walked past him, deeper into the hangar. She stopped at a workbench to check a schematic. As she leaned forward, the sleeve of her blue shirt rode up, exposing the faded, jagged tattoo. A female private walking by with a tire iron stopped. She looked at the tattoo. She didn't sneer. She didn't laugh. She looked at it with wide eyes, recognizing the shape not as a mistake, but as a legend. Cool ink, ma'am, the private whispered. Chloe looked down at the Valkyrie. She remembered the cave. She remembered the general's hand shaking as he held the needle. She remembered the promise. Thank you, Chloe said, touching the ink. It cost a lot. She went back to work, the sound of the motor pool rising around her. Not a noise of exclusion, but the hum of a machine that was finally running right. We share these stories not just to entertain, but to remind us all that valor doesn't always wear a uniform, and heroism doesn't always look like a movie poster. Sometimes it looks like a woman in a blue shirt with a faded tattoo, making sure the trucks are safe for the next generation. If you believe in honoring every veteran's story, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe to She Chose Valor for more stories of women who served, sacrificed, and survived. Until next time, keep your standards high.